Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into the complicated lives of some of the most genetically entangled women in medieval history. Born from cousin pairings, wed to uncles, and sometimes both, these royal women were entangled in dynastic strategies that prioritize keeping both power and bloodlines within the family. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I always love seeing the global audience come together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft ambient sound, and let's ease into tonight's tale. Juana of Castile was born in 1479, the third child of two highly influential and closely related figures, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. This iconic royal duo not only sponsored Columbus and expelled the Moors, but also thought cousin marriage was still a clever political tactic. Juana hailed from the Trastamara dynasty of Spain, a lineage already steeped in a tradition of intra-family marriages. By her birth, the royal bloodline had been mixed just enough to function, but not enough to prevent issues like mood disorders, intense melancholy, and some unfortunate genetic features. As a teenager, Juana was sent to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome, who was more of a Habsburg genetic blend than a true heartthrob. Unsurprisingly, he was her cousin. The Habsburgs had a reputation for two things: amassing titles and ignoring genetic consequences. Things started well. Juana was sharp, beautiful, and deeply in love with Philip. Sadly, Philip wasn't quite as devoted. He had a wandering eye and little interest in marital fidelity, which clashed with Juana's fiery temperament in a court that expected emotional restraint and tolerated affairs. When Philip died unexpectedly, perhaps of typhoid, perhaps poetic justice, Juana spiraled. She couldn't bear to part from his remains and travelled across Spain with his coffin, even opening it from time to time to check on him. Romantic or unstable? Possibly both. Her unusual behaviour gave her political enemies ammunition. Her father Ferdinand cited it to declare her unfit to rule. Her son Charles, who would become Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, did the same. Conveniently, both men ruled in her stead while Juana spent most of her life confined to a convent. Was Juana truly mad? Historians still debate the question. Some believe she battled mental illness worsened by grief and isolation. Others suggest she was simply inconvenient, an emotional, perceptive woman in a world that equated noticing your husband's infidelity with political rebellion. Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into the complex and twisted lives of some of the most inbred women in medieval history. Born to cousins, married to uncles, sometimes both, these women were part of a royal habit of keeping marriages within the family for political and genetic reasons. Before we start, feel free to like and subscribe if you truly enjoy this content, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing the global audience. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some ambient noise, and let's settle into tonight's story. Juana of Castile was born in 1479, the third child of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the famous couple who funded Columbus, expelled the Moors, and still believed cousin marriage was a smart political move. Juana belonged to the Trastamara dynasty, which had a strong tradition of inbreeding. By the time she was born, the royal bloodline was just barely functioning, alive, but not without side effects like emotional instability, deep sadness, and the occasional unfortunate jawline. As a teenager, Juana was sent to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome, who, despite the name, looked more like a perfectly inbred Habsburg. Naturally, he was her cousin. The Habsburgs were obsessed with two things: acquiring crowns and ignoring genetic red flags. At first, things seemed good. Juana was smart, beautiful, and reportedly deeply in love with Philip. Sadly, Philip wasn't as committed and preferred the company of other women. Juana's jealousy and emotional nature clashed with a court that was used to loveless marriages and casual infidelity. When Philip died suddenly, possibly from typhoid, possibly from karma, Juana didn't handle it well. She refused to be separated from his body, even traveling across Spain with his coffin and occasionally opening it to check on him. Romantic? Maybe. Disturbed? Also maybe. Her many political rivals pounced on this behavior. Her father Ferdinand claimed it proved she was unfit to rule, and her son Charles, later Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, did the same. Both ended up ruling in her place, while Juana spent most of her life confined to a convent. Was Juana truly insane? Historians are still unsure. Some believe she suffered from mental illness worsened by grief and isolation. Others think she was simply too politically inconvenient in a time when a woman showing emotion, especially over a cheating husband, was practically seen as a crime. Born to cousins, married to uncles, and sometimes both, these women were part of royal families that saw intermarriage as both a political and genetic strategy. Before we get into it, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fun to see our global audience. Now dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for a cozy hum, and let's settle into tonight's story. Juana of Castile was born in 1479, the third child of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the same famous monarchs who backed Columbus, expelled the Moors, and were big fans of cousin marriage. Juana came from the Trastamara dynasty, which had a long-standing habit of marrying relatives. By the time she was born, the family tree had been mixed just enough to survive, but not enough to avoid things like emotional instability, deep sadness, and a few unfortunate facial features. As a teenager, Juana was sent to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome. Despite the flattering nickname, he was more of a genetically perfected Habsburg than a heartthrob, and yes, he was her cousin. The Habsburgs were obsessed with two things: acquiring royal titles and ignoring the risks of inbreeding. At first, things seemed to go well. Juana was smart, beautiful, and reportedly very much in love with Philip. Sadly, Philip didn't return that devotion. Instead, he chased after other women. Juana's jealousy and emotional intensity clashed with a court that expected its royals to treat marriage as more of a cold alliance than a passionate relationship. When Philip died suddenly, supposedly from typhoid, though some might say karma, Juana didn't handle it well. She refused to leave his body behind, even traveling across Spain with his coffin, sometimes opening it just to see him. You could call it romantic, or maybe unstable. Her erratic behavior gave her political enemies the perfect excuse. Her father Ferdinand claimed she was unfit to rule and used it to take power. Her son Charles, who would become Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, did the same. As a result, Juana spent most of her life in a convent under supervision. Was she truly mad? Historians still argue about it. Some believe she suffered from mental illness worsened by grief and isolation. Others say she was simply an inconvenient figure in a world where being a passionate woman especially one who dared to call out her husband's affairs, was seen as a threat. Juana wasn't just a sad case, she was the result of royal expectations, intense inbreeding, and extremely poor coping strategies. If there were an award for the most foreseeable genetic result, Maria Anna of Spain would win it, while her son drooled nearby. Born in 1634, Maria Anna was the child of King Philip III of Spain and Margaret of Austria, who were cousins in true Habsburg fashion. Naturally, Maria Anna ended up marrying her own uncle, Ferdinand III, the Holy Roman Emperor, not a distant or complicated relative, but her actual uncle, because when your family tree is just a circular ambition chart, why not go all in? Maria Anna was intelligent, devout, multilingual, politically aware, and reportedly kind. She brought grace to the imperial court, along with genes that were essentially a copy of a copy. Her main historical legacy was giving birth to Charles II of Spain, arguably the most inbred monarch ever to stay upright on a throne. Charles didn't just get the crown, he inherited the full Habsburg genetic backlog, an oversized jaw, a weak chin, constant illness, infertility, and what many believe was cognitive impairment. He had trouble doing basic things like eating and talking, relatable pre-coffee but problematic when running an empire. Was this all Maria Anna's fault? Number. She didn't create the Habsburg marriage policies, but she did follow them, continuing the tradition of turning royal alliances into genetic disasters. To her credit, she loved her son deeply and protected him throughout his frail life. She acted as regent during his youth and tried to guard him from political scheming, an impossible task, like ending a food fight in a room full of hungry toddlers armed with knives. Maria Anna died in 1696, 1 year after Charles. The Spanish Empire, already in decline, soon fell into the War of Spanish Succession, largely because Charles left no heir, which of course he didn't. If you've ever wondered what happens when a family treats marriage like a spreadsheet equation, look no further than Isabella of Habsburg. Born in 1501, she was the daughter of Philip the Handsome, yes, him again, and Joanna of Castile, also called Joanna the Mad, though understandably stressed, might be more accurate. That made Isabella the sister of Emperor Charles V and related to much of European royalty. Her DNA wasn't so much mysterious as it was a recipe repeated too often, heavy on the Habsburg, a bit of Trastamara, and absolutely no new input. At 17, Isabella married Christian II of Denmark, a king known for reform attempts, strange behavior, and the energy of a man one bad breakfast away from attacking his furniture. The marriage was both politically motivated and incredibly awkward. Naturally, they were cousins, but the real issue was that Isabella's Habsburg genes were already spinning in circles like an old screensaver. She was expected to bring grace, stability, and political gain, and perhaps to distract from the fact that her family tree was beginning to resemble a wreath. Life in the Danish court was harsh for Isabella. Christian's reign was disastrous. He was eventually overthrown, imprisoned, and even exiled. Isabella stayed by his side through it all, whether out of true love or sheer hereditary stubbornness. Her health deteriorated amid years of political turmoil and exile, and she died young at 24, likely due to complications from childbirth or illness, worsened by stress and royal politics. Their children carried on the noble tradition of inbreeding. One daughter, Dorotha, married Frederick II, Elector Palatine, a classic Habsburg match. After all, if the dynasty prized anything more than titles and prominent jawlines, it was making sure no one needed a name tag at family reunions. Eleanora of Austria was born in 1498, which meant she was already burdened, caught between the Renaissance and countless royal obligations. As the daughter of Philip the Handsome and Joanna of Castile, and the older sister of Charles V, she had what could only be called deluxe Habsburg DNA. Her childhood was a diplomatic waiting room, her teen years a string of near marriages. At one point she was engaged to Henry VIII of England, but that fell through, lucky her. Avoiding that marriage might be one of the rare cases where Habsburg inbreeding actually worked out for the better. Instead, her first marriage was to Manuel IV of Portugal, significantly older, and also her first cousin once removed, which in royal circles was basically like marrying someone from just down the corridor. She became Queen of Portugal, had 2 children, and was widowed before turning 30. Naturally, she was remarried, this time to Francis I of France, a man who had once been a prisoner of her brother, Charles V Romantic, right? Francis wasn't especially fond of her, treating her more like a diplomatic gesture with a Habsburg label than a wife. Their marriage was cold and childless. Francis preferred his mistresses, while Eleonora passed the time reading, praying, and quietly looking the other way. Though she was Queen of France, Eleonora stayed loyal to her Habsburg roots, and you couldn't blame her. The family may have been inbred, but at least they were consistent. She outlived both husbands and withdrew into a quiet retirement, dying in 1558. She was remembered for her devotion, calm demeanor, and her rare ability to survive 2 royal marriages without scandal, an Olympic feat in her lineage. Her life was a lesson in quiet perseverance. She didn't cause wars or stir controversy, but she fulfilled the classic Habsburg woman's role: marry a cousin, produce heirs, and politely ignore the growing family resemblance. Catherine of Aragon was born in 1485 to Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, Spain's ultimate power couple, an occasional genetic bottleneck. As a princess of the newly united Spanish kingdoms, Catherine had it all: wealth, education, titles, and a family tree that was tighter than a medieval tavern tune. If DNA came with a warning light, hers would have been flashing non-stop. She was deeply devout, fiercely protective of her children, and not someone to be taken lightly. Though Louis IX would later be canonized, it was Blanche who ensured he survived long enough to earn sainthood. Anne of Bohemia and Hungary was born in 1503, which, in Habsburg terms, meant she was essentially born with royalty in her blood, and a family reunion too. Her parents were Vladislaus II of Hungary and Bohemia, and Anne of Foix-Candale. While her mother might seem like fresh genetic stock, don't be misled. This was still a web of closely tied royal relations. Anne grew up knowing she'd eventually be married off like a precious diplomatic asset. Sure enough, in 1521, at 18, she married her double first cousin, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, later Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. Yes, double first cousin, meaning they had the same 4 grandparents. Basically, it was like marrying a genetic mirror image. In today's world, such a match would raise eyebrows. In Habsburg circles, it raised political stability, along with concerns about genetic health. Priorities, right? Despite the risks, the marriage was a major political win, merging the Habsburgs with the crowns of Hungary and Bohemia. it also resulted in 15 children. That's right, 15. Because when consolidating royal bloodlines, they didn't hold back. Anne was described as devout, gentle, and loyal, essentially someone who endured being the human glue in a sprawling European dynasty. She travelled extensively with Ferdinand during his imperial duties and held court wherever Habsburg presence needed reinforcing. Tragically, she died young in 1547, likely worn out from years of childbirth, diplomacy, and pretending not to notice her family's genetic recycling. She passed before Ferdinand became emperor, but her legacy was monumental. The Habsburgs had firmly taken hold of Central Europe, largely thanks to her. Anne's life was a textbook example of royal inbreeding, born into a dynasty that valued political borders over biological sense, stability over sanity, and still managed to supply half of Europe's emperors. Joanna of Naples, also known as Joanna I, ruled in the mid-14th century, a time when marrying your cousin wasn't just accepted, it was practically a noble survival tactic. Born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria, and Marie of Valois, Joanna arrived with royal legitimacy stamped all over her, and a couple of layers of cousin-related genes to boot. Her ancestry was a Mediterranean labyrinth, blending the French house of Valois and the Angevin dynasty of Naples. Her uncles were kings, her cousins were kings, and her future husbands, kings too, and also, of course, cousins. By the time she was 3, Catherine was already promised to Arthur, Prince of Wales, the eldest son of Henry VII. Why? Because European royals loved marrying their cousins, ideally with matching coats of arms. Catherine and Arthur were second cousins through John of Gaunt, practically distant relatives by noble standards. They wed in 1501, but Arthur died just 5 months later. Did the marriage involve consummation? That question would go on to shape English history, spark the Reformation, and baffle legal scholars for centuries. In the meantime, Catherine was left in a diplomatic limbo, a teenage widow in England, without a husband, with no dowry returned, and still a pawn in royal politics. Enter Henry VIII, Arthur's younger brother, and eventually her second husband. It's not every day someone marries 2 brothers from the same family, but the Trastámaras were known for recycling names, titles, and even spouses. Their early marriage was genuinely loving. Catherine was smart, elegant, and politically astute. She brought Henry prestige, an alliance with Spain, and 5 pregnancies, only one of which produced a surviving child. Mary, later, Mary, C. But Henry wanted a male heir, and after years of miscarriages, Catherine couldn't provide one. That's when things escalated. Henry claimed their marriage was invalid because she had previously been with his brother. Catherine, supported by the Pope, insisted it was legitimate. This led to one of history's most dramatic annulment battles involving religious arguments, political maneuvering, and a king determined enough to start his own church to escape the marriage. Catherine was exiled, stripped of her title, and lived out her days in isolation, still claiming to be Henry's rightful wife. Her royal lineage was noble, but also heavily inbred. Her marriage reshaped England not through war or diplomacy, but as a reminder that keeping things in the family rarely ends smoothly. Margaret of Austria was born in 1480, the only daughter of Emperor Maximilian of Austria and Mary of Burgundy. As a Habsburg by birth, her family tree resembled a circle drawn by an overly ambitious child with a crown. Her life from the beginning was all about strategic matchmaking. At 3, she was engaged to Charles VIII of France. By 12, she was returned like a mismatched wedding present when Charles chose to marry Anne of Brittany instead, who came with a more valuable piece of land. Humiliated but poised, Margaret is said to have remarked, "I shall be revenged." And to her credit, she later ruled half of Europe. Fair enough. Margaret's second engagement was to a Prince of Castile, her cousin and the son of Ferdinand and Isabella. As expected, the match was intended to strengthen ties between the Habsburgs and Spain, while also keeping the family bloodline tightly interwoven. Sadly, Juan died shortly after their wedding. Still not 20, Margaret had now lost two royal husbands, one by rejection, one by untimely death. She received more offers, including one from a son of Henry VIII, but she refused. Margaret was done with the royal marriage circuit. She never married again, instead dedicating herself to politics, the arts, and outliving most of her relatives, a challenge in itself. Her nephew Charles V appointed her governor of the Netherlands, where she led with sharp intellect, diplomatic skill, and classic Habsburg resilience. She negotiated peace deals, managed fractious provinces, and was one of the rare women in Europe trusted with genuine power, likely because she bore the Habsburg name and wasn't occupied producing an heir from her great-uncle's nephew. Despite the royal chaos surrounding her, Margaret's life was mostly free of scandal. She supported the arts, sponsored music, and even tried to train young Charles in how to govern, a thankless job considering he became emperor at 19 and was related to half of Europe. Margaret died in 1530 when a small foot injury turned fatal because medieval medicine was just an elaborate path to death. She remains one of the few Habsburg women known more for her leadership than her lineage, though her lineage was still wildly inbred. Blanche of Castile was born in 1188, when marrying your cousin was considered savvy politics, not a biological hazard. As the granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England, and the daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England, Blanche was practically royalty incarnate. Before she could walk, her family was already arranging which cousin she'd marry. The chosen one was Louis, son of the French king, also her cousin. And not some distant relation, but the kind where they shared grandparents. Questionable? Certainly. But back then, marrying outside the family was bad politics. At age 12, Blanche sailed to France to marry Louis. His father, King Philip II, supposedly remarked, "She is small, but she will grow charming." They wed in 1200, plunging Blanche into a life of dynastic strategy, religious duty, and ignoring the obvious family tree overlap. Blanche wasn't just decorative. When Louis became king, she was queen consort, and after his death she became the real authority. As regent for her young son, the future Saint Louis, she ruled France with a firm grip and clear understanding of her family's instability. She launched crusades, put down revolts, and held the kingdom together while dealing with barons who didn't like that she was both a woman and a bit too Castilian for their tastes. She responded with diplomacy, force, and occasionally some well-placed imprisonments. Genetically, Blanche embodied centuries of royal convergence, English, Castilian, French, all combined into one determined and powerful queen. If DNA came with a warning light, hers would have been flashing non-stop. She was devout, fiercely protective of her children, and definitely not someone to underestimate. Louis IX would later be declared a saint, but it was Blanche who ensured he lived long enough to earn it. Anne of Bohemia and Hungary was born in 1503, which in Habsburg terms meant she came into the world with half a royal crown and half a family reunion in her bloodstream. Her parents were Vladislaus II of Hungary and Bohemia and Anne of Foix-Candale. And while that second Anne might sound like a breath of fresh genetic air, don't be misled. This was still a web of closely repeated royal ties. Anne always knew she'd be married off like an especially valuable diplomatic suitcase. Sure enough, in 1521, at age 18, she married her double first cousin, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, who would go on to become Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. That's right, double first cousin, meaning they had the same grandparents on both sides, essentially a genetic mirror match. Today, marrying your double first cousin might raise eyebrows. In the Habsburg world, it raised dynastic strength and probably the risk of congenital issues, priorities. Genetically risky or not, the match was a political jackpot. It united the Habsburg line with the thrones of Hungary and Bohemia and produced 15 children. Yes, 15. When it came to consolidating royal bloodlines, they didn't mess around. Anne was known for being devout, kind, and dutiful, which is another way of saying she accepted being the human glue holding a vast European power structure together. She travelled with Ferdinand on his imperial missions and held court in various locations, depending on which part of Europe needed reminding that the Habsburgs were still ruling, and still very into intra-family marriage. Sadly, Anne died in 1547, likely worn out by endless childbirth, court responsibilities, and the exhausting pretense that her family tree wasn't just a giant loop. She didn't live to see Ferdinand become Holy Roman Emperor. But thanks to her, the Habsburgs tightened their grip on Central Europe, like it was a clearance sale. Anne's life is a textbook example of elite inbreeding, a woman born into a dynasty that valued borders over biology, political control over genetic sanity, and somehow still managed to supply Europe with half its emperors. Joanna of Naples, also known as Joanna I, reigned during the mid-14th century, a time when marrying your cousin wasn't just common, it was basically how nobility survived. Born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria, and Marie of Valois, Joanna entered the world already coated in royal validation and multiple layers of cousin marriage heritage. Her lineage was a Mediterranean tangle, the French house of Valois on one side, the Angevin of Naples on the other. Her uncles were kings, her cousins were kings, and her future husband was bound to be one too, and probably another cousin. She negotiated peace treaties, kept the provinces mostly loyal, and even ran an efficient postal system. The Habsburgs trusted her with war, rebellions, and administration, practically sainthood. Isabella died in 1633, remembered as one of the most capable rulers of her era. Her reign was one of the few times Habsburg inbreeding produced competence instead of just weak chins and erratic monarchs. Mary of Burgundy was born in 1457, the only child of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, and Isabella of Bourbon. She inherited vast lands, a lineage obsessed with noble marriages to familiar names, and the duty to marry another aristocrat with similarly recycled genes. At 19, after her father died in battle, she found herself ruling the wealthiest and most politically unstable duchy in Europe. Everyone wanted a piece of Burgundy, France, the Habsburgs, neighboring states, and of course, the cousins. To bring stability, Mary married Maximilian of Austria, her second cousin once removed, and a future Holy Roman Emperor. By Habsburg standards, this was a perfectly acceptable match. The family had long been circulating within its own gene pool. The marriage was politically savvy. Maximilian gained control over Burgundian lands, and Mary got a capable husband who could both fight battles and negotiate treaties, sometimes on the same day. Despite being an arranged alliance, their marriage was reportedly affectionate, almost scandalously so for their time. Mary's rule was short and intense. She faced constant pressure from French aggression, rebellious Flemish cities, and nobles who believed women should only rule a sewing circle. Still, she held her ground, granting rights through the Great Privilege, asserting her authority alongside Maximilian, and essentially managing a medieval Fortune 500 company while raising children. Then, in 1482, tragedy struck. While hunting, because nobles loved dangerous hobbies, Mary fell from her horse, broke her back, and died at just 25. Her sudden death left Maximilian grieving and Europe fighting over their children. Her passing marked a turning point. Burgundy, once independent and powerful, was absorbed into the Habsburg Empire through her son, Philip the Handsome, yes, the same Philip who married Joanna the Mad and passed on his jawline to half of Europe. Maria Theresa of Austria was born in 1717, the only surviving child of Emperor Charles VI. Her birth didn't cause much excitement since she wasn't a boy. Still, Charles, either hopeful or politically naive, issued the Pragmatic Sanction, an imperial decree declaring she could inherit the empire anyway. Spoiler: Europe didn't take that well. When Charles died in 1740, Maria Theresa inherited the vast Habsburg lands and a diplomatic nightmare. Nearly every major power in Europe challenged her claim to rule, largely because she dared to be a woman on the throne without even marrying a first cousin yet. Joanna's first husband was her cousin, Andrew of Hungary. Their marriage, arranged by the Pope, was politically motivated and far from happy. Andrew was considered boorish and widely disliked in Naples. Joanna and the local nobility weren't fond of him, and not long after he was named co-ruler, he was murdered, likely strangled with a curtain cord, and likely with Joanna's knowledge or even approval. It was, in short, a bad match. Joanna later married 3 more times, first to Louis of Taranto, her cousin, then to James IV of Majorca, also a cousin, and finally to Otto of Brunswick-Grubenhagen, a lesser noble with surprisingly little family connection, scandalous by her standards. If marrying relatives were a sport, Joanna earned 4 medals. Despite the drama, Joanna was a formidable ruler. She held power in Naples independently, challenged the authority of the Pope, and supported reform in a deeply corrupt system. At one point, she was even excommunicated for siding with the wrong Pope during the Western Schism. You know you're succeeding in medieval politics when both your kin and the Vatican want you gone. Ultimately, she was overthrown by yet another relative, Charles of Durazzo, who invaded Naples, imprisoned her, and had her smothered with a pillow, a fate eerily consistent with her family history. Joanna of Naples governed boldly in a man's world, married extensively within her family tree, and died likely at the hands of someone who shared her great-great-grandmother. Born in 1566, Isabella Clara Eugenia was the daughter of Philip II of Spain and Elizabeth of Valois, a union between close cousins. By then, the Habsburgs were less a family and more of a genetic project with royal funding. From an early age, Isabella was trained to rule, which meant mastering diplomacy, religion, and the art of overlooking the fact that many of her uncles were also cousins. Her father was especially fond of her, perhaps due to her intelligence and composure, or because she didn't rebel or seek marriage outside the family. Though she was once considered a potential heir to the Spanish Empire, the tradition of favoring male succession meant her future depended on marrying, unsurprisingly, to another Habsburg. She wed Archduke Albert of Austria, her cousin. If that seems surprising, welcome to royal genealogy. Together they were named co-sovereigns of the Spanish Netherlands, a polite way of saying they governed a politically unstable region under Madrid's oversight. Isabella rose to the task with intelligence, devout faith, and the steady hand of someone who had memorized every papal decree and still found time to manage her court. Her marriage to Albert was reportedly calm, maybe even happy, perhaps helped by their shared DNA. When Albert died in 1621, Isabella continued ruling alone as the Spanish crown's representative. She took religious vows and dressed as a nun, but that didn't stop her from leading effectively. Actually, never mind. She arranged for Maria Theresa to marry Francis Stephen of Lorraine, who was technically a distant cousin because of course he was. Their marriage produced 16 children, including future emperors, queens, and Marie Antoinette. Yes, the let them eat cake one. With that many kids, Maria Theresa didn't just pass on the crown, she passed on practically all the genes. But don't mistake her for some pampered royal lounging behind velvet curtains. Maria Theresa was one of the most capable rulers of her time. She reformed the army, revamped the tax system, centralized government, and modernized education, all while being pregnant pretty much every other year. It was the kind of multitasking that makes modern supermoms look like part-timers. Still, she was a Habsburg, which meant a healthy dose of micromanagement, strict Catholicism, and a habit of marrying her children into the same small circle of noble families again and again. The result was an even denser web of Habsburg cousins spread across Europe like royal ivy gone wild. She ruled until her death in 1780, outliving her husband, surviving multiple wars, and keeping the Habsburg name dominant for generations. Her son Joseph II, Holy Roman Emperor, inherited the throne, and her genetic legacy marched determinedly into the Enlightenment. Born in 1384, Yolande of Aragon was royal from birth to death, the daughter of King John of Aragon and Violent of Bar. Basically, she had more noble surnames than most people had teeth. Naturally, her family tree looked more like a tangled root system, with many relatives also doubling as marriage prospects. Yolande had a royal upbringing, was smart, politically astute, and by medieval standards, dangerously outspoken. This made her both a valuable dynastic asset and a nightmare for anyone expecting a quiet, obedient queen. She married Louis II of Anjou, a French prince, and yes, also her cousin, because nothing says romance like shared great-grandparents. As Duchess of Anjou and Queen Consort of Naples, though only in title, Yolande was never the sit-and-sew type. She was the strategist behind alliances, the bankroller of armies, and, fun fact, one of the few royals who supported Joan of Arc and managed to survive the political fallout. While her husband chased crowns he couldn't keep, Yolande handled the real power. She raised armies, negotiated treaties, managed estates, and ran Anjou in all but name. She married off her children to other royals, again, often cousins, and made sure they had both political leverage and just enough royal blood to stay legitimate. Her son René of Anjou earned the nickname the Good, likely because he inherited her intelligence and only some of the family's tangled genetics. Her daughter Marie married Charles VII of France, giving Yolande influence over the French throne and, more importantly, a hand in shaping Joan of Arc's military campaigns without ever wielding a weapon herself. Yolande wasn't just another embroidered name on a royal family tree. She was one of the few medieval women who held real power without sitting on a throne. Behind every weak king or overconfident general was a Yolande, rolling her eyes and fixing the strategy. She died in 1442, having outlived her enemies, her husbands, and the worst of the 100 Years' War. Yes, she was inbred, but she was also sharp, strategic, and just as powerful as the kings she quietly outmaneuvered. Margaret of York was born in 1446 to Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville, so aristocratic they could barely walk into a room without tripping over their titles. As the sister of Edward IV, Richard III, and essentially a walking War of the Roses pedigree, Margaret was born for political manoeuvring, bold choices, and very close family marriages. So naturally she married Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, a man known for his ambition, love of warfare, and of course being another relative in the ever-tightening European royal circle. Their 1468 marriage wasn't about love, it was about making France uneasy. Margaret brought English status, and Charles brought a sharp beard and an even sharper temper. Despite being a political alliance, their marriage was reportedly respectful and, surprisingly, functional. Margaret adapted well to the Burgundian court, which was more Renaissance fashion show than medieval relic, full of luxury fabrics, small dogs, and a dangerously intense love of embroidery. Her intelligence and diplomatic ability earned her the nickname the Great Lady of the Netherlands. She hosted visiting leaders, managed court finances, and handled letters while Charles was off starting wars he usually couldn't finish. After his inevitable death in battle, Margaret didn't retreat from public life. Instead, she stepped up as regent for her stepdaughter Mary of Burgundy and advised her son-in-law Maximilian of Austria. Yes, the same Maximilian who married Mary and extended the Habsburg name across Europe like a smug, spreading vine. Though Margaret had no children of her own, her role in shaping dynastic politics was significant. She helped raise Philip the Handsome, who married Joanna the Mad and eventually fathered Charles V. So if you're wondering where the Habsburg flair for ambition and prominent chins began, Margaret helped nurture it. She died in 1503, having outlived her brothers, many of her rivals, and the golden age of Burgundy. She may not have added another branch to the royal family tree, but she certainly tied the existing ones tighter with perfect manners and just enough regal pride to make it last. Catherine de' Medici was born in 1519 into the wealthy but scandal-ridden Medici family of Florence. While not as inbred as the Habsburgs, a family tree included a few non-cousins, she made up for it by marrying into the French royal family and producing a small battalion of monarchs with very familiar genes. Her husband, Henry II of France, wasn't related by blood, but was a perfect match politically. Their union was a strategic blend of Italian wealth and French military might, with Medici ambition meeting Bourbon theatrics. Catherine arrived in France without much influence, speaking accented French, and accompanied by an inconvenient rival, Diane de Poitiers, her husband's very public mistress. But Catherine stayed patient. Over the next 10 years, she quietly formed alliances, mastered court politics, and had 10 children, most of whom would go on to marry their own cousins, proving that while Catherine wasn't born a Habsburg, she definitely raised her kids like one. When Henry died in a jousting match because nothing says overcompensation like taking a lance to the face, Catherine became Queen Mother and quickly rose to become the most powerful woman in France. Her sons Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III each wore the crown in turn. Catherine alternated power behind each of her sons. She was a devout Catholic, but politically adaptable, something that in 16th century France meant sometimes funding Protestant weddings and other times orchestrating their bloody demise. Cough Street, Bartholomew's Day, massacre cough. That incident seriously damaged her reputation. Even for a queen who married her daughters into 3 major European dynasties, it was seen as too much. Catherine ended up being blamed for nearly everything: the religious wars, the court's corruption, and the suspiciously high poisoning rates at official banquets. Yet she was also a cultural patron, a shrewd political mind, and somehow managed to keep the Valois dynasty limping along despite endless wars, rebellious nobles, and royal dinners that probably required food tasters and lots of wine. She died in 1589, politically drained but still scheming. Her legacy, a generation of royals who all looked vaguely related and ruled with a mix of charm, Catholic guilt, and intense cousin marriage energy. In ancient Greece, sleep wasn't just about rest. It was sacred, a pathway to the divine. Nowhere was this more true than in the Asclepia, dream temples devoted to the healing god, Asclepius. These weren't just cozy lodges or rustic shrines. They were vast spiritual centers where people came not just to be healed, but transformed. To prepare for sleep there, you didn't just lie down. First came ritual purification. Pilgrims fasted, bathed in holy springs, made animal sacrifices, and often avoided sex or impure thoughts. The idea was to purify both body and spirit before undergoing incubation, a sacred sleep meant to bring healing dreams. Inside the abaton, a dark enclosed room, the sick would lie on stone benches or animal skins. Torchlight flickered. Priests murmured prayers and burned incense. Sleep here was a deliberate journey into another realm. Dreams were seen as divine messages from Asclepius himself, offering symbolic, or sometimes very literal, healing advice. For example, dreaming of snakes crawling over your body was actually a good sign. Snakes were holy to Asclepius, symbols of renewal and divine help. In fact, harmless snakes roamed freely in the temples, even the sleeping areas. Yes, people willingly slept among snakes and considered it a sacred privilege. In the morning, temple priests, who often acted more like dream interpreters than healers, would help decode the visions. They sometimes recommended herbal treatments or dietary changes. Other times, the dream itself was seen as the cure, believed to realign the soul or spirit. Greek dream temples reveal that sleep wasn't just a physical need for ancient people, it was a sacred journey, a dialogue with the gods. And if fortune smiled on you, that divine whisper in the night might not only heal your body, but transform your destiny. In ancient Egypt, sleep wasn't just the absence of wakefulness, it was a kind of miniature death. It was when the soul, or Ba, left the body to travel through spiritual realms. To guide this journey and guard the sleeper from dark forces, Egyptians created sleep rituals that blended mysticism and medicine, deeply rooted in their cosmic beliefs. Before bed, especially among the wealthy or priestly classes, elaborate routines were followed. Incense played a key role. Frankincense and myrrh weren't just pleasant smells, but sacred tools. Burning them was believed to purify the air of evil, invite divine favor, and bring peace to the mind. The smoke itself symbolized prayers rising to the heavens, surrounding the sleeper in spiritual protection. Next came prayers or chants, spoken aloud by priests or murmured by individuals. These were not just calming rituals, but active defenses invoking gods like Thoth, deity of wisdom and dreams, or Bez, a squat lion-faced dwarf god who guarded against nightmares and evil. Images of Bes were often carved into headboards or painted on walls. His bizarre appearance was meant to scare off lurking threats. The sleeping space itself was treated as holy. Beds, often raised and made from reeds or wood, sometimes had built-in charms or protective symbols. Unique headrests, strange-looking by today's standards, were thought to keep the soul aligned with the stars. Sleep direction was important too. Many slept facing the sunrise or constellations, like Orion, linked to Osiris and the afterlife. If someone had troubling dreams or sought divine answers, they might go to a temple, especially ones devoted to Serapis or Imhotep, for dream incubation rituals similar to those in Greece. These involved chants, oils, and incense, all meant to invite sleep and divine messages. For the Egyptians, going to bed wasn't about comfort. It was a sacred performance uniting body, soul, and cosmos. Sleep was perilous, holy, and full of potential. In ancient Babylon, the boundary between dreaming and destiny was razor thin. Sleep wasn't just about resting, it was a spiritual battleground filled with omens, spirits, and divine messages. The Babylonians took dreams very seriously, so much so that entire professions were built around interpreting them. Dream priests, called Shailu, were experts in decoding the visions that visited both royalty and ordinary people. Before bed, Babylonians often carried out protective rituals to attract good dreams and ward off bad ones. Dreams were believed to come from gods like Marduk or Ishtar, but also from demons or restless spirits. To guard against harmful forces, people used amulets, placed protective tablets under their beds, and drew magical symbols around their rooms like a spiritual security system. They burned incense made from juniper, cedarwood, and tamarisk at sunset, not just for the aroma, but to purify the space and honor the gods. To them, sleep was a portal to divine contact, and the gods preferred to be welcomed in a clean setting. Many people said nighttime prayers or incantations asking for truthful, helpful dreams and protection from misleading ones. If someone needed guidance on going to war, planting crops, or proposing marriage, they might practice dream incubation by sleeping in a temple or under the open sky, hoping for a dream clear enough to steer their decisions by morning. When these dreams came, they were written down on clay tablets, sometimes even illustrated. Over time, the Babylonians compiled dream dictionaries, huge collections of symbols and meanings. A lion in a dream might mean victory. Drowning could signal betrayal. These texts would later shape how the Greeks and Romans interpreted dreams. For the Babylonians, dreams weren't just random thoughts. They were divine messages. Every night brought a chance to understand the god's will, as long as one followed the right rituals and earned divine favor. In early India, during the time of the Vedic texts, sleep was seen as more than just rest. It was a cosmic act. These ancient writings described sleep as a sacred moment when the Atman, or soul, reunited with a universal spirit Brahman before returning at dawn. Like any sacred ceremony, falling asleep required preparation, discipline, and awareness. A key practice was pranayama, or breath control. People were taught to quiet their thoughts and slow their breathing, not to fall asleep quickly, but to sync their breath with the rhythm of the universe. Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into the complicated lives of some of the most inbred women in medieval history. Born to cousins, married to uncles, sometimes both. These women were part of a royal custom of keeping bloodlines close, both politically and genetically. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe if you truly enjoy this content, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun to see how far this community reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some background ambience, and let's settle in. Hannah of Castile was born in 1479, the third child of two very significant and very related figures, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the same duo who backed Columbus, expelled the Moors, and firmly believed cousin marriage was a smart political move. Hannah belonged to the Trastamara dynasty, known for keeping marriages within the family. By the time she was born, the royal bloodline was just functional enough to survive, but not strong enough to avoid problems like mood disorders, deep sadness, and unfortunate jawlines. As a teenager, Hannah was sent to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome, who turned out to be more of a genetically refined Habsburg than a heartthrob. He was her cousin, naturally. The Habsburgs had two obsessions: gaining more thrones and ignoring basic genetic sense. Initially, things seemed to go well. Hannah was smart, striking, and reportedly very devoted to Philip. Unfortunately, Philip was more devoted to chasing other women. Hannah's intense feelings and jealousy didn't sit well with a court that preferred emotionally distant marriages and mild infidelity. When Philip suddenly died, officially from typhoid, though some say karma, Hannah didn't handle it well. She refused to part with his body, traveling around Spain with his coffin and occasionally opening it to see him. Was this romantic or unstable? Hard to say. Her political enemies thought the latter. Her father Ferdinand claimed it proved she was unfit to rule, and her son Charles, who would become Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, said the same. This conveniently allowed them both to take power, while Hannah spent most of her life in a convent. Was she truly insane? Historians still debate it. Some believe she had a genuine mental illness made worse by grief and isolation. Others argue she was simply a political problem in an age when a woman showing emotion, especially about an unfaithful husband, was practically seen as a crime. These rituals were often followed by meditation to soothe the shen or spirit believed to dwell in the heart. When the shen was disturbed by emotions, poor diet, or even noise, it could lead to nightmares, restless sleep, or spiritual disturbances. Sleep settings were intentionally arranged. Beds were typically made of wood or bamboo to encourage good energy flow. Headrests were low and firm to maintain proper body alignment and allow energy or kui to move smoothly. Rooms were kept minimal in decoration to avoid overstimulation. Cleanliness wasn't just for comfort, it was a form of energetic hygiene. Sleep posture also held importance. Sleeping on the right side was thought to improve digestion and enhance the clarity of dreams. The orientation of the body, head, and feet was aligned with geomantic principles similar to what later became known as feng shui. Dreams were viewed as spiritual journeys taken by the Hun the ethereal soul, while the Po, or physical soul, stayed with the body. If someone woke up feeling drained or frightened, it was believed their hun had gotten lost or attacked during its travels. To protect against this, talismans or charms made with cinnabar were placed under pillows. Taoists did not see dreams as mere psychological events. They considered them spiritual diagnostics and maps of one's energy and karma. Sleep, when practiced correctly, was a kind of inner alchemy, a nightly cultivation of immortality. Long before European contact, many Native American tribes regarded sleep and dreams as sacred paths to spiritual insight, ancestral knowledge, and personal growth. For the Lakota, Navajo, Hopi, and others, dreams were not just private experiences but messages from the cosmos that could influence an individual's fate or even that of the entire tribe. Each tribe had unique night rituals, but they shared the belief that dreams connected the dreamer to the spirit world, often through animal guides, ancestors, or deities. Preparation for this spiritual contact included purification rituals. One widely used method was the sweat lodge, a sacred steam bath where participants sat inside a dome-shaped structure filled with steam from water poured over hot stones. They would chant prayers and songs to invite insight and clarity before sleeping. For those in search of profound visions, especially young men reaching adulthood, the vision quest was a key rite. This sacred ritual involved fasting, solitude, and sleeping outdoors for several nights. The seeker would find an isolated place, create a small circle or shelter, and sleep under the open sky without food, water, or human contact. The aim was not just to endure, but to dream. Tribal elders or shamans would later interpret the dream, which often determined the person's future role, whether as a warrior, healer, storyteller, or leader. In daily life, many indigenous communities placed deep trust in dream catchers, a now widely recognized symbol that began with the Anishinaabe people. These delicate webs of sinew and beads were hung over beds to sift through dreams, letting only the good ones pass while trapping the bad ones until morning light dissolved them. For children, dream catchers were both protective tools and symbolic guides, helping them understand a world where dreams could teach, warn, or bless. Elders were often respected as dream keepers, people who understood symbols and could interpret the meanings hidden in dreams. A dream about a bear might represent strength, while a hawk could suggest insight or a coming challenge. Dreams were taken seriously, discussed around campfires, woven into stories, and sometimes even used to shape tribal choices. Among indigenous American traditions, sleep was seen as a sacred conversation with the invisible, not an escape from life, but a deeper awakening. In ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, sleep was closely tied to the divine. The Sumerians, Akkadians, and later Babylonians believed that every dream carried a message and that powerful gods governed what people would see during the night. Sleep wasn't seen as a rest from reality, but as an active form of spiritual communication. Preparing for sleep was nearly as important as dreaming itself. The Mesopotamians had a rich array of night and dream deities, with Nanshi, goddess of justice, prophecy, and dreams, at the center. Her temples welcomed those seeking answers through visions, especially during holy festivals when the boundary between worlds was thought to be thinner. Worshippers would sleep within temple grounds, hoping for divine guidance through a practice called dream incubation. To encourage meaningful dreams, people would cleanse themselves ritually before sleep. This could involve bathing in sacred rivers like the Euphrates or Tigris, anointing the body with scented oils, and reciting prayers to Nanshi or Aya, the god of wisdom and magic. Priests often prescribed these rituals as spiritual remedies for dreamers in need, whether they were facing illness, personal troubles, or political dilemmas. In homes, sleeping areas were simple but spiritually guarded. Clay tablets with inscriptions or protective charms were placed under pillows or hung nearby. These featured protective spells to ward off night demons like Lamashtu, a terrifying female spirit believed to harm women and children during the night. Amulets of the demon slayer Pazuzu were especially popular, placed near sleepers for protection. Dream interpretation was a respected profession. Dream readers, known as Baru, compiled extensive manuals, early dream dictionaries built from generations of recorded symbolism. These tablets categorized dreams by their content: animals, weather, food, celestial signs, and even the feelings experienced in the dream. A lion could suggest royal favor. A collapsing house might foretell disaster. The Mesopotamians became early experts in a structured form of dream divination known as oniromancy. In ancient Mesopotamia, sleep wasn't just rest, it was a sacred act, filled with ritual, risk, and divine meaning. Dreaming meant stepping into the realm of the gods, and one needed to be prepared with prayers, oils, and protective charms. Among the ancient Celts, from the foggy hills of Scotland to the forests of Gaul, dreams were seen as gateways to the other world, a mystical dimension inhabited by spirits, fairies, ancestors, and gods. Though the Celtic people left fewer written records, oral traditions and Roman writings reveal that their sleep rituals, especially among the Druids, were deeply symbolic and sacred. Druids, the spiritual guides and scholars of their time, believed sleep allowed the soul to cross into this other world, not a land of the dead, but a place of hidden truths. This realm coexisted with the human world, and dreams were a rare way to reach it. To do so, the body and spirit had to be prepared. Nighttime rituals began with cleansing using herbs. Plants like mugwort, vervain, and yarrow, still associated with dreaming, were burned or placed under pillows to sharpen dreams. Their smoke was believed to thin the boundary between worlds. Sometimes the herbs were made into teas or potions, consumed with quiet prayers to spirits or ancestors. People also chose their sleeping spots carefully for their spiritual energy. Sacred sites like hills, stone circles, and groves were thought to concentrate power and make dreams more vivid. During festivals such as Samhain, the Celtic New Year, and time of honoring the dead, people slept in these spots hoping for visions from lost loved ones or messages from gods like Brigid or the Dagda. Some warriors even slept alone in caves or woods after fasting and chanting, seeking dreams that would predict success or failure in battle. Dream images like animals, colors, or scenes were brought to poets and seers called fili, who interpreted them through verse. A white stag might symbolize change. Drowning in a forest could mean betrayal. Dreams were part of Celtic mythology, shaping personal paths and shared legends. To the Celts, the night was alive, with messages for those brave or pure enough to hear them. In ancient Japan, sleep, magic, and the spirit world were guided by a belief system called Onmyodo, the way of yin and yang. It blended Taoist thought, Shinto beliefs, and Buddhist ideas. Onmyodo gave both nobles and ordinary people methods to protect their souls during sleep, and to understand the meanings within dreams. At the heart of Onmyodo was the idea that night brought strong yin forces, dark, hidden, and potentially dangerous. Sleep left people open to attack from spirits called yokai or urami, and to harmful directional energy known as bad kon. To guard against this, people performed bedtime rituals that offered both spiritual defense and cleansing. One common practice was placing paper charms inscribed with sacred writings on bedroom walls or near sleeping areas. These talismans, often blessed by an onmyoji, a practitioner skilled in astrology, divination, and exorcism, could ward off spirit, block nightmares, and attract good luck. Before going to sleep, people often lit incense made from sandalwood or agar wood. The fragrance was thought to please protective spirits and form a cleansing shield. In noble homes, Buddhist sutras were sometimes chanted or silently recited to calm the mind and encourage restful sleep. Spiritually sensitive individuals avoided sleeping facing north, a direction linked with death, instead choosing auspicious orientations. Children, seen as especially vulnerable, were safeguarded with engraved charms or special dolls placed nearby to absorb or deflect harmful energy. These dolls, known as hetogata, were believed to carry the sleeper's spiritual burdens. Dreams were often documented in personal journals or discussed with monks and spiritual guides. Certain dreams, like those involving fire, blood, or animals, were seen as omens of illness, betrayal, or divine warning. Others, featuring flight, waterfalls, or lotus flowers, signaled spiritual progress or blessings. Dreams were messages, but only to those who could interpret them, and only if they made it through the night unharmed. In ancient Japan, sleep was more than rest. It was a ritual, a tactic, and a nightly spiritual trial under the watch of spirits and stars. Long before Alexandria rose to power on Egypt's coast, there was Heracleion, called Thonis by the Egyptians. For centuries, it served as Egypt's main port. It was a bustling hub where Greek traders, Egyptian priests, and foreign diplomats mingled in a vibrant cultural center. But by the late medieval era, Heracleion had seemingly vanished from history. Its location was lost, remembered only in old writings and fading legends. Many thought it a myth, like Egypt's version of Atlantis. But Heracleion was real. It once stretched across the Nile Delta, with canals flowing past grand temples and busy markets. Colossal statues of gods like Amun-Gereb and Horus loomed over its harbour. Ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and other lands docked there to pay duties and gain entry to Egypt. Its customs station was among the most vital in the ancient world. It also held religious significance, where pharaohs performed rituals to receive divine approval before their rule began. So how did such a city vanish? Between the 2nd and 8th centuries CE, a series of natural disasters, earthquakes, rising seas, and liquefaction, where the ground turned unstable, caused much of Heracleion to sink into the Mediterranean. Over time, sand and silt covered the ruins, and the Nile's tides gradually erased all trace of it. Heracleion was quite literally lost. For over a millennium, it remained hidden underwater, known only through vague references by Herodotus and a few Greek authors. Few believed it could ever be found, until 2000, when French underwater archaeologist Franck Goddio made a stunning discovery near Aboukir Bay. Beneath 30 feet of water preserved in the silty seabed lay a forgotten city, waiting like a time capsule. Colossal statues, shipwrecks, gold coins, and inscribed steles began to emerge, showing that Heracleion hadn't vanished forever, but had merely slumbered beneath the waves. At its height, Heracleion was much more than a coastal town. It served as the vital center of Egypt's international commerce, the initial gateway for foreign merchants and envoys before they could journey deeper into the Nile region. Positioned strategically near the canopic mouth of the Nile, the city acted as both a customs hub and a cultural gateway. Every seaborne item entering Egypt had to pass through Heracleion first. Ships carrying olive oil, wine, incense, and other goods docked there before proceeding inland. If DNA had a warning signal, hers would have been flashing non-stop. She was devout, fiercely protective of her children, and absolutely not someone to take lightly. Louis IX may have become a saint, but it was Blanche who kept him alive long enough to get there. Anne of Bohemia and Hungary was born in 1503, which, in Habsburg terms, meant she came into the world with half a crown and a family reunion in her blood. Her parents were Vladislaus II of Hungary and Bohemia and Anne of Foix-Candau. And while that second Anne might seem like a break from the usual royal gene pool, don't be fooled. It was still very much a tightly wound web of noble intermarriage. Anne grew up fully aware that she'd be married off like a high-value diplomatic package. And in 1521, at the age of 18, she married her double first cousin, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, who would later become Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. That's right. Double first cousin, meaning they had all four grandparents in common, basically a genetic mirror image. Today, marrying a double first cousin would turn heads. In Habsburg circles, it was a strategic move, though it likely increased the chances of hereditary issues. But the marriage was a political jackpot. It joined the Habsburgs with the thrones of Hungary and Bohemia and resulted in 15 children. Because if you're going to cement dynastic lines, you might as well go all in. Anne was known for being devout, gentle, and dutiful, which is a polite way of saying she didn't complain while being used as the linchpin of European power games. She travelled with Ferdinand on his imperial campaigns and held court in various cities, wherever a reminder was needed that the Habsburgs still ruled and still loved marrying their relatives. Anne died young in 1547, likely exhausted by years of childbirth, diplomacy, and pretending her family tree wasn't one big loop. She didn't live to see Ferdinand crowned emperor, but through her, the Habsburgs managed to dominate Central Europe like it was a fire sale. Anne's life was a prime example of noble inbreeding, a woman born into a dynasty that put political boundaries ahead of biology, stability over logic, and somehow still produced half of Europe's emperors. Joanna of Naples, also known as Joanna I, ruled during the mid-14th century, a time when cousin marriage wasn't just common, it was a survival tactic for nobles. Born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria, and Maria of Valois, Joanna came into the world stamped with royal credentials and more than a trace of interfamily marriage. Her family tree was a tangled Mediterranean mess. On one side, the French house of Valois, on the other, the Angevins of Naples. Her uncles were kings, her cousins were kings, and, unsurprisingly, her future husbands were both kings and cousins. It was like a city coming back to life. Once thought to be only a legend, Heracleion was now being uncovered piece by piece, offering a breathtaking look into a long-lost world. Even more thrilling, only a small part of it has been excavated. Much of Heracleion remains hidden, waiting beneath the waves. The wave, the city had a glorious beginning, but its end came gradually, quietly, and tragically. Unlike places destroyed by war or fire, Heracleion sank slowly into the sea over centuries, erased by a series of natural events that were subtle but devastating. The first cause was seismic activity. Located in a geologically active part of the Nile Delta, Heracleion was built on unstable, soft ground made of silt and clay, not solid rock. Frequent small earthquakes may have weakened its base, but the most damaging effect was a process called liquefaction, when the saturated ground loses its strength and behaves like quicksand. That's what occurred beneath the city. As quakes shook the region and salt water crept farther inland due to rising sea levels, the ground beneath Heracleion turned unstable. Entire parts of the city began to sink. Buildings, temples, even ships were dragged into the mud. Bit by bit, the city fell apart. Canals overflowed, docks crumbled, and sacred structures leaned and disappeared below the surface. Its busy harbour could no longer function, and trade routes shifted west to Alexandria, which grew more influential. By the late 2nd century BCE, Heracleion was already fading. By the 8th century CE, it had nearly vanished under the Mediterranean. What's haunting is how little anyone could do. No one tried to flee in terror because there was nothing to escape in a single moment, only the slow, unstoppable advance of nature. The people stayed, rebuilt, and hoped. And then one day, the city was simply gone. Boats passed over its sunken remains, and fishermen dropped their nets where ancient gods had once stood. The city's memory faded until even its name became legend. Today, Heracleion's sinking stands as a powerful reminder. Even the mightiest cities can fall, not to war, but to the slow, relentless force of nature. Though now submerged, the artifacts retrieved from its ruins offer a vivid glimpse into everyday life in this once thriving Egyptian port. Heracleion wasn't just a ceremonial or political hub. It was a vibrant, lived-in city full of markets, temples, courtyards, and shipyards. It was a place where people prayed, traded, debated, and dreamed. Underwater surveys have helped map parts of the city, revealing canals that wound between stone buildings and quays. Boats carried goods and people through its watery streets, much like carts did elsewhere. Heracleion has often been called the Venice of Egypt, though it existed more than 1,000 years before Venice. Its architecture combined traditional Egyptian styles with other influences. CE, and in many respects Alexandria didn't merely follow Heracleion, it replaced it, becoming the crown jewel of the Mediterranean and the new center of Egypt's maritime and intellectual life. Yet the link between the two cities wasn't entirely one of rivalry. It reflected a broader shift in Egypt's political and cultural landscape. During Heracleion's height, Egypt was still under native rule, and the city's importance came from its religious role and its strategic location at the Nile Delta's edge. It served as a checkpoint for foreign ships, a tax collection hub, and a place where sacred rituals affirmed royal authority. But when the Ptolemies, Greek rulers who followed Alexander the Great, seized control, they reoriented Egypt around Greek customs, urban planning, and governance. Alexandria, with its monumental lighthouse, vast harbors, and legendary library, was designed to dazzle and centralize authority. Trade was redirected to this new city, and Heracleion was gradually bypassed. The Ptolemies imported Greek architecture, thought, and politics, transforming Alexandria into a thriving hub of commerce, science, the arts, and diplomacy. For a time, however, both cities existed side by side. Heracleion still hosted religious ceremonies and its temples remained active, but the center of power was shifting. Administrative control, elite residence, and global attention moved to Alexandria. Heracleion began to fade, still sacred, still honored, but no longer vital. Then came the environmental disasters, ground liquefaction, rising seas, and finally the city's submersion. As Heracleion sank beneath the waves, Alexandria stood firm, better protected by its geography, and absorbed Heracleion's legacy and trade routes. Today, the ruins of both cities narrate this dual history. One lies silent beneath the sea, the other, though no longer grand, still thrives. Yet without Heracleion, there could be no Alexandria. The older city was the doorway and the base upon which Egypt's future was constructed. When Heracleion vanished underwater, it took with it not only temples and monuments, but also the daily items and sacred relics that shaped life in a thriving metropolis. Fortunately, the oxygen-poor, silt-rich waters of Abukir Bay preserved many of these objects remarkably well, giving archaeologists an unprecedented look at how the people of Heracleion lived, worshipped, labored, and sailed. Among the most stunning finds are massive statues, some over 5 meters tall, depicting Ptolemaic rulers, Egyptian gods like Isis and Hapi, and even giant sphinxes. Though they toppled over time, many were discovered in their original positions, surrounded by temple debris, as if time had frozen their collapse. Their faces, stances, and carvings remain visible, a testament to the craftsmanship of Heracleion's artisans. And it wasn't just grand statues that survived. Divers have discovered thousands of smaller artifacts, including gold coins, lead weights, ceremonial tools, jewelry, and pieces of pottery. One especially intriguing find was a collection of bronze ritual vessels, likely used in temple ceremonies featuring detailed inscriptions and religious symbols. Other items recovered include oil lamps, writing instruments, and personal ornaments, the kinds of belongings someone might have carried in a bag or placed on a home altar. Heracleion was also a major port, and its maritime history is unmistakable. Over 70 shipwrecks have been found, many still containing their original cargo. Wooden hulls, anchors, and sailing tools have given researchers insights into how ancient Egyptians and their foreign visitors conducted trade. Some ships even appear to have sunk while still docked, indicating they may have gone down during the same seismic events that destroyed the city. Perhaps the most mysterious discoveries are the stele and bilingual inscriptions written in both ancient Egyptian and Greek. Mothers once prayed to the goddess Isis for their children's protection. All that life, preserved underwater for 1,000 years, has now resurfaced. The discovery of Heracleion has transformed archaeology, proving that sunken cities are real. With rising sea levels and climate shifts, scientists are reconsidering what other lost cities might lie beneath the oceans, places like Carthage, ancient Alexandria, and parts of India and Southeast Asia. Heracleion has become a model for uncovering forgotten civilizations in unexpected places. Today, its artifacts are displayed in museums, and its story is told in books and documentaries. Yet the city remains largely unexplored, still resting beneath the sea. Heracleion is no longer lost, but it remains an enigma, a ghost city caught between eras, echoing from an age of deities, commerce, and fallen empires. Long before modern dental care and fluoride, ancient people already knew the misery of toothaches. But they didn't just endure the pain, They tried to treat it. Some of the oldest evidence of dental work dates back nearly 9,000 years, showing our ancestors were more medically resourceful than we might think. In the Mehrgarh region of what is now Pakistan, archaeologists discovered human remains from around 7,000 BCE. They found skulls with teeth that had been deliberately drilled using flint tools. These were not random or traumatic marks. They were clean, purposeful holes in molars. The individuals were adults, indicating they survived the procedure. It was likely excruciating, as there's no sign of anesthesia, just stone tools and the strength to endure. The drills were likely powered by a bow-like mechanism, spinning a flint tip back and forth to grind into the tooth enamel. This is the earliest known dental practice, thousands of years before ancient Egypt. The reasons? Possibly to remove decay, drain abscesses, or for ritual purposes. Some teeth even showed traces of resin or bitumen, likely used to seal the holes, a primitive form of filling. And this wasn't unique. Other prehistoric cultures also filed, extracted, and even dyed teeth. In some African and Indonesian cultures, people altered their teeth not for health reasons, but to express identity or gain spiritual protection. Still, it's clear that early humans recognized the importance of dental health and took matters into their own hands when tooth decay struck. Back then, a bad tooth wasn't just painful, it could be life-threatening. An untreated abscess could cause serious infection, fever, or even death. So in a world without antibiotics, even primitive drilling might have been life-saving. Prehistoric people didn't have modern tools like porcelain crowns or anesthesia, but they weren't ignorant. They faced dental issues with stone tools, raw bravery, and surprising accuracy, laying the groundwork for future dentistry. When it comes to ancient medical practices, Egypt often takes center stage, and that includes dentistry. The Egyptians not only acknowledged dental issues, they developed a whole branch of medicine for it. The earliest known dentist was Hesi-Re, who lived around 2600 BCE under Pharaoh Djoser. His tomb calls him chief of dentists and physicians, showing dentistry was already a respected field during Egypt's Old Kingdom. But don't imagine a peaceful clinic. Egyptian dentistry combined hands-on treatments with magical rituals. The famous Ebers Papyrus, a 3,500-year-old medical text, lists cures for toothaches, infections, and gum problems. Some treatments used chewed herbs and honey, which have antibacterial properties. Others were more bizarre, like placing a dead mouse on the aching tooth while chanting spells to chase away evil spirit. Not exactly FDA approved. Egyptians also practiced oral hygiene. They used twigs as toothbrushes, chewed fragrant sticks for fresh breath, and made toothpaste from crushed eggshells, ox hooves, pumice, and myrrh. It was gritty and far from minty, but it did the job. Archaeological evidence from mummies shows they attempted dental surgery. Some skulls show drilled molars like those found in ancient Pakistan, and others have drained abscesses. There are signs of primitive splints to hold loose teeth in place. Still, most Egyptians likely endured dental pain without much treatment. Their diet, heavy in stone-ground bread, introduced grit that wore teeth down and caused breakage. Interestingly, archaeologists have found gold wires and metal bands in some skulls, possibly the earliest dental bridges or stabilizers. It's unclear whether these were used during life or added after death, but they show that Egyptians were experimenting with ways to preserve oral structure. In short, Egyptian dentistry was a mix of science and superstition. They understood infection, maintained hygiene, and experimented with surgical tools, all while calling upon gods like Sekhmet and Thoth. Though they lacked anesthetics, their determination drove progress. While Egyptians were making gritty toothpaste from myrrh and ox hooves, the Etruscans in ancient Italy were developing something far more refined: dental prosthetics. Long before Rome's rise, these skilled artisans created some of the earliest dental bridges, elegant, practical solutions for missing teeth that influenced dentistry for generations. Dating back to around 700 BCE, Etruscan tombs have revealed skulls with gold bands and wire ligatures securing replacement teeth. These weren't merely practical, they were also symbols of wealth and status. Often the false teeth weren't artificial at all. They were real human or animal teeth, sometimes from oxen, anchored with fine gold loops beside natural teeth. The process was delicate, precise, and likely painful, but it was effective. The Etruscans, renowned for their metalwork, applied their skill to dentistry. Their gold bands were both malleable and durable, providing strong yet adjustable dental fixtures. These bridges weren't meant for ordinary people, they were customized for the elite, probably crafted by expert metalworkers or physicians within noble or religious circles. What's especially notable is the aesthetic aspect of their dental work. These prosthetics didn't just serve a purpose, they restored facial balance and preserved looks. The Etruscans understood, long before modern cosmetic dentistry, that missing teeth could change not only chewing, but also facial structure. In a culture where status and appearance were closely linked, this was important. There's no solid proof that they performed extractions or surgeries, but the existence of dental appliances shows that oral care was deliberately practiced, not just for health, but for image. Like their ornate tombs and intricate jewelry, Etruscan dental work reflected a society deeply concerned with appearance, legacy, and honor, even after death. Some of these dental bridges were found intact in burials, indicating they were used in life and carried into the afterlife, a testament to how strongly dental care was tied to identity. In a time without modern dentures or implants, the Etruscan gold-bound bridges stood as symbols of innovation and sophistication, a shining testament to a civilization ahead of its time. By the Roman Empire's emergence, dentistry had become a blend of practical remedies, surgical attempts, and questionable cosmetic practices. The Romans didn't just adopt medical knowledge from the Etruscans and Greeks, they expanded and organized it, adding their own distinctly Roman flair. Think of it as ancient dental care infused with military precision and vinegar mouthwash. One notable Roman medical author, Aulus Cornelius Celsus, included dental procedures in his Encyclopaedia de Medicina. He described methods for pulling teeth, relieving toothaches, and cleaning the mouth using abrasive mixtures made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and charcoal. In ancient China, maintaining oral health was seen as part of achieving overall bodily harmony. Similarly, in ancient India, dental care was integrated into the broader framework of Ayurveda, a holistic medical system dating back over 3,000 years. Ayurvedic texts like the Karaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita contain detailed insights on dental diseases, treatments, and preventative practices that align with some modern understandings. Ayurveda emphasized daily routines, purification, and prevention. One common practice was dantadavana, or cleaning the teeth using herbal chewing sticks from trees like neem, licorice, or babul. known for their antibacterial qualities. The stick would be chewed until the end became brush-like, then used to clean the teeth, a tradition still found in some rural areas today. Another Ayurvedic method was oil pulling called kavala or gandusha, where sesame or coconut oil was swished in the mouth to draw out toxins and strengthen oral tissues. Modern research supports its potential in reducing harmful bacteria and improving gum health. The Sushruta Samhita, attributed to the surgeon Sushruta around 600 BCE, includes chapters on oral conditions such as tooth extractions, jaw fractures, and ulcers. Sushruta detailed surgical techniques using iron tools, herbal antiseptics, and even cauterization for severe infections, painful but systematic. Dental diseases in Ayurveda were categorized based on symptoms such as sensitivity, dantaharsha, tartar buildup, dantashakara, and gum inflammation, dantaveshta. Treatments depended on an individual's dosha, vata, pitta, or kapha, and might include herbal rinses, dietary adjustments, and meditation to ease tension or jaw grinding. To ancient Indians, the mouth was a sacred passage for speech, food, and breath. Caring for it wasn't merely a health practice, it was a spiritual responsibility. Dentistry in Ayurveda was not just medical care, it was a daily ritual connecting the body, mind, and spirit. In ancient Greece, medicine, including dental care, was shaped by philosophy, anatomical study, and logical reasoning. Unlike cultures that saw disease as spiritual, the Greeks sought physical explanations for illness, including tooth problems. Though they lacked specialized dentists, Greek physicians practiced, notably, advanced oral care for their era. Medical thinkers like Hippocrates and Aristotle studied teeth in anatomical and health-related contexts. Hippocrates, regarded as the father of medicine, wrote about tooth structure, growth, decay causes, and extraction methods. He believed dental diseases stemmed from imbalances in the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, especially in cases of gum issues and tooth pain. For the Greeks, diet was a key factor in maintaining oral health. If her DNA had a warning light, it would have been flashing non-stop. She was devout, fiercely protective of her children, and absolutely not to be underestimated. Louis IX eventually became a saint, but it was Blanche who kept him alive long enough to earn it. Anne of Bohemia and Hungary was born in 1503, which, in Habsburg terms, meant she came into the world with half a crown and half a family reunion running through her veins. Her parents were Vladislaus II of Hungary and Bohemia, and Anne of Foix-Candale. And while that second Anne might seem like a refreshing bit of new genetic material, don't be fooled. This was still a royal knot of repeated relations. Anne grew up knowing she'd be married off like a highly prized diplomatic suitcase. And sure enough, in 1521, at the grand age of 18, she married her double first cousin, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, who would go on to become Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. That's right. Double first cousin, meaning they had the same four grandparents. Basically, a genetic mirror match. Today, marrying your double first cousin would definitely raise eyebrows. In Habsburg circles, it raised dynastic security and probably the odds of birth defects too, priorities. Still, the marriage was politically ideal. It merged the Habsburgs with the thrones of Hungary and Bohemia and produced 15 children. Yes, 15. Because if you're consolidating royal bloodlines, you might as well be thorough. Anne herself was described as devout, kind, and dutiful. which basically meant she never complained while being used as the glue holding together a massive European political puzzle. She travelled with Ferdinand on various imperial duties and held court in different cities wherever a reminder was needed that the Habsburgs were in charge, and still very much into family weddings. Unfortunately, Anne died young in 1547, likely exhausted from a life of childbirth, political responsibility, and pretending her family tree wasn't in love with itself. She didn't live to see Ferdinand crowned Holy Roman Emperor, but thanks to her, the Habsburgs managed to absorb Central Europe like it was on sale. Anne of Bohemia and Hungary's life was a textbook case of elite inbreeding, a woman born into a dynasty that chose borders over biology, stability over sanity, and still somehow ended up producing half of Europe's emperors. Joanna of Naples, or Joanna I, ruled in the mid-14th century, an era when cousin marriage wasn't just acceptable, it was practically a noble survival tactic. Born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria, and Marie of Valois, Joanna entered the world wrapped in royal credentials and at least 2 layers of cousin marriage legacy. Her family tree looked like Mediterranean spaghetti. On one side, the French house of Valois. On the other, the Angevins of Naples. Her uncles were kings, her cousins were kings, and her suitors, kings and cousins.